Hi everyone, finally here, Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the new Kendrick Lamar album, Damn! Compton rapper Kendrick Lamar is back with his fourth studio full-length album. I guess that is if you don't count his B-sides record that dropped last year, Untitled Unmastered. Essentially a set of raw B-sides and afterthoughts following his incomparable 2015 album, To Pimp a Butterfly. An album that was so great, even the leftovers from this album sounded amazing. Lately, Kendrick has been on fire. Everybody knows it. He is just on a level that none of his contemporaries are on right now in terms of achieving both incredible commercial success and artistic success. His albums do numbers, but he still manages to be lyrical, conceptual, and on the cutting edge of modern music. And just like he said on that teaser freestyle, The Heart Part 4, he came through the classic, he dropped that, then he came right back with another one. So his consistency is impeccable. And on that very same line, Kendrick gives us the Kendrick Lamar guarantee that the next album is going to be great. It's going to have the whole industry on an ice pack. It's a bold claim, but Kendrick has given us no reason thus far to doubt him. So Damn is here, and Kendrick once again has hit us with an artistic left hook, because this record is far from being the grand, jazz-influenced meditation on self-worth that To Pimp a Butterfly was. This album brings an entirely different sound, and on top of that, while it is conceptual, I think Kendrick approaches concept in a really fractured way, totally unlike what anybody has heard on Good Kid, Mad City or To Pimp a Butterfly, where you might have multiple ideas, but they all kind of coalesce to one point. Before I get too deep into Damn, let me just say, I'm pretty floored by the fact that Kendrick, with each project, has reinvented himself almost entirely from top to bottom, and in this case, in a really short amount of time. Now, in comparison with everything Kendrick has released thus far, Damn is his most scattered album. Even though it may not be as dense or as thematic as Good Kid, Mad City or To Pimp a Butterfly, it's harder to compartmentalize because there's so much going on. This is Kendrick's most raw and intense album emotionally, whether that be tracks that have an incredible amount of aggression and grit or just really pain, sorrow, and depression. Now, what is guiding this change of pace? It may have a lot to do with the Fox News clip that he plays toward the beginning of the album, where his art, his BET performance specifically, I believe, was misconstrued as being bad for black culture, bad for black people, bad for race relations in America. And this clip that he plays is not the only time in the mainstream media that Kendrick's art has been interpreted in this way. Now, Kendrick has taken this slander against his art personally, obviously, but I think he's also taken it as a challenge on this album to basically say, hey, you want the angry, hedonistic, violent rap guy? I'll give him to you. I'll be that guy. I'll hop on a trap banger. I'll get in other rappers' faces. I'll play that role. I'll get nasty like that. I'll play dirty. And the way he goes about embodying this on this record, I think, is really creative. Not just with the heightened aggression of this album, not just with his interesting approaches between him and his producers to contemporary flows and production styles, but there are actually quite a few moments on this record where you get like these reverb DJ drops on the record that's just like, hey, new Kung Fu Kenny, woo! Like I'm listening to some mixtape that I downloaded off of DatPiff. But the decision to go into this direction runs even deeper than this, as Kendrick uses this as an opportunity to comment on hip-hop culture at large and race relations in a post-Obama America. And I would say there's one more major layer to this album, which is addressed on a couple of tracks here, but it's not something that is spoken about throughout the entire record, and that's that I genuinely think Kendrick is depressed on this album. Seriously, I don't think we've ever heard Kendrick on a record consistently sounding so unhappy, so unsure of himself, sounding this vulnerable. I mean, even on the darkest moments of Good Kid, Mad City and on To Pimp a Butterfly, it still felt like we were listening to an artist who knew where he was going, that everything he was doing was being orchestrated as some part of grand plan, a lot like the God he's been so sure is looking out for him on his previous projects. But on Damn, Kendrick is shaken, not just in regards to his faith, but I think his moral compass as well. And those two things are really important, pivotal things to a Kendrick Lamar project. Those things usually play pretty central roles when it comes to keeping his mind right. And with those two things deteriorating on this record, Kendrick's message sounds way more unresolved and conflicted than I thought it would be going into this record. It may also have to do with the fact that he's taking on such huge concepts stated in bold capitalized lettering in the titles of these tracks. Pride, lust, fear, God, etc. These are things that philosophers have been mulling over for thousands and thousands of years. I don't expect all of their intricacies to be explained in a 55-minute rap album. But Damn isn't so much about the answer to anything as much as it is about the struggle to understand. Something that's especially intense and difficult for Kendrick because his savior complex drives him to have that answer. It drives him to have that solution. It also feeds a loneliness in him on the song Feel, where he sort of portrays himself as the savior, as the hero, as the provider, but nobody is saving or providing for him. Nobody's praying for him. And even though he may have legions of fans who are certainly concerned with his well-being and his mental state, when you put yourself in that position, you still can't help but feel that way occasionally. And again, faith also drives the struggle of this album because on numerous occasions, Kendrick has said that he does what he does with his music as some kind of service to God. But then he's left with no solid conclusions or answers when he feels like he's been left behind by this God to suffer and to struggle, which he takes as some kind of sign from God, comparing himself to Job, which happens on the song Fear, which if you're unfamiliar with it, it's basically a biblical story about a man, Job, who God essentially tears his life apart as a test of his faith and his love. It's on the same track where I think Kendrick's faith, his belief in God, takes the ugliest turn that it has on any project that he's released so far. Right at the very end of the song Fear, where we hear a voicemail from his cousin Carl, which he alludes to on the song Yeah. And if you look at this voicemail, it's pretty interesting. Referencing Deuteronomy, Carl makes the case that Kendrick is unhappy, he's struggling, he's unsure of things because he's kind of drifted away from God's light. He's not living up to the commandments, the statutes, the laws set by God, pretty much the Christian God. He then makes the case that Black people, Hispanic people, and Native American people are the true children of Israel, which seems harmless on its face. That's fine. But then that is channeled into every injustice over the course of history being interpreted as a punishment by God because these groups of people have drifted away from the word of God. And this is pretty much presented without comment. I don't see Kendrick criticizing this idea. It's just kind of thrown out there. Again, on the song Yeah, where Kendrick references this call, references this voicemail, from the few things he says about it, I'm led to believe that he thinks that there's at least some truth to it. Now, let me just say before I go much further, I outright disagree with this on every level. I personally feel it's bullshit and stupid to chalk up mass genocide, slavery, Jim Crow, the Mexican-American War, and countless other things to some kind of divine punishment. The roots of these injustices are political, they're social, they're economic. To blame it all on God's will just kind of seems disgusting to me, bordering on self-hatred and most definitely self-flagellation. And in my opinion, the exact opposite of being conscious. Now, my ideological disagreement here didn't really factor into my overall feelings with the album, especially since this voicemail does happen to land on what I felt was one of the better tracks on the record. But I do think moments like this should not be overlooked by the listener. In fact, they should be at the forefront of the listener's mind while they listen to this album, because this idea of God punishing Kendrick for not living up to the moral code that he should is part of the reason he's suffering on this record. This is the mentality that he's beating himself up with on this record when you see him going into those dark places. He's rationalizing his own pain and suffering as being the decision of some supreme being that he's never seen, and all he can do is just throw himself at God's mercy and say, please don't do this, please don't take all my success and everything away. For me personally, walking around with that mentality, that view of the world, I would go crazy. It would be like walking on on hot coals for the rest of my life, or going into a fucking wood chipper feet first. Now, I would say those are the major themes of the album. There are other abstract sort of ideas that are placed throughout the record too. Most notably the symbolism of the blind woman and Kendrick's death at the very start of the album. Also the serendipitous series of events that could have led to Kendrick not even being born on the closing track, Duckworth. Obviously there were intentions to placing these things in the album, like the vocal passages that are reversed at a few points in the album, which you could put in an audio editor, place in the right way, see what Kendrick is saying there, and get a deeper meaning out of the track, potentially. But I took a lot of these moments as just being kind of open to interpretation for the listener. And maybe you could even take this album on the whole as that, because it seems like Kendrick is intentionally trying not to do what he's done in the past, and that is beat the listener over the head with some kind of central theme, concept, or idea. Now, that's me trying to wrap up the general idea of an almost bipolar album. Things get even more interesting on this record when you dive into each track individually. On the song DNA, while this is a very aggressive banger and is a track that is solely exciting just on its sound and Kendrick's awesome vocal performance here, it's also a track where we see Kendrick struggling to kind of make sense of all these things that he sees as pretty much being a part of his genetic code. That could be anything good, positive, or amazing, like being royalty, to something really negative and dark and awful, to like being poison. On the song Element, Kendrick celebrates his unapologetic dominance of the rap game. Also his connections to criminals on a bar or two. This is a side of Kendrick we don't often see. Usually he's trying his best to be on the straight and narrow, follow the good path, but he's definitely getting angrier, more aggressive, more violent on cuts like this. This is an emotional and a moral inconsistency that I think he even acknowledges on the song Triple X, which has an awesome instrumental moment on it where you kind of have these police sirens, this revving bass, a hard-hitting rhythm. Kendrick is coming through with some of the meanest and most aggressive bars I've heard him put on any project. It sounds like something off of Good Kid, Mad City on steroids. But then immediately after that, we have this beat break away, and then Kendrick finds himself speaking to a bunch of kids about like gun control or something. So right there, we kind of see Kendrick acknowledging this inconsistency, this contradiction, this hypocrisy in his own self. Also, I do want to mention that Bono's appearance, U2's appearance on this track, went over way better than expected. On the song Humble, the trick is pretty much not to be humble at all. It feels like Kendrick is more focusing on telling other rappers to be humble. It is a decent banger. I guess my one disappointment with this track is that there's not really anything to hearing it in the greater context of the album that I don't feel like I already got out of just listening to the track by itself. And the song Fear is easily, in my opinion, one of the most incredible moments on the album from a lyrical standpoint. The track is a conceptual deep dive into the idea of fear, and that's fear of everything from being disciplined by your parents to a fear of God, a fear of death. In the second verse here, Kendrick lists off multiple scenarios in which he could see himself dying. On this track, Kendrick also fleshes out the idea that whether or not his shortcomings, and the shortcomings of other people too, are due to some kind of wickedness or weakness. And he mentions the idea of DNA again as being something that is preventing him, because there are all these things sort of in his DNA, positive and negative, that are keeping him from evolving fully into God's light. Not every track's message is as concentrated or as obvious though. The song Pride, for example, with the exception of a few lines in the track, the song doesn't really seem to be that strong of a statement on the idea of pride. However, the track title here does seem to be a part of an ongoing thing in the track list where you kind of have ideas that complement one another or mirror each other or are the opposite of one another, shoulder to shoulder. Blood and DNA, Pride and Humble, Lust, Love, and Triple X, Fear, God, and Duckworth, which makes sense because I think Kendrick sees the fact that his father lived at the end of that track as almost like an act of God. Of course, there are numerous lyrical highlights on this album, but the greatness of Kendrick's bars really comes to fruition when you observe what he's trying to say in the grander scheme of things in a single song. Because in general on this record, Kendrick is not being quite as poetic, not quite as flowery, especially on tracks like DNA and Humble, songs where I think he is making his lyrics a little more blunt because he wants to go more aggressive, he wants to go angrier. I think he also simplifies his lyrical approach a bit as a means to come through with some of the poppiest tracks he's ever recorded too. Which brings me to the sound and the production and the musical style of this album, which in my opinion is most likely the Achilles heel of this record, because the sound of this record is really all over the place. It's sort of spotty, and I feel like in this attempt to shoot for a more contemporary sound, Kendrick is not really playing to his strengths. The song Yeah, for example, while I do like what lyrically this song does for the narrative of the record, I find Kendrick's performance and the beat here to be really bland and sluggish and forgettable. I kind of feel the same way about the song Loyalty. I actually do like the kind of smooth, dreamy, melodic instrumental here, and Rihanna's contributions to the track aren't that bad either. But as far as Kendrick's vocal performance here, it's not really a fiery, entertaining moment for me. Nor do I think Kendrick makes a statement in his lyrics on loyalty that's all that profound. But really, these moments, in my opinion, are just okay. It's two other songs on the record that I think make for two of the worst that Kendrick has ever put onto a project. For one, the song Love, which not only features Zakari's choir boy vocals on the hook, but also Kendrick, I wanna be with you, I wanna be with you. What made him or anybody think that that was a good sounding refrain, I don't know, because this track just delivers one cornily sung bar after another. And again, I mean, I don't know why Kendrick would compromise his sound this much for a song about love when lyrically he's not really making that profound of a statement on the topic. And while I like the song God a little bit more as a concept, as a lyrical moment on the album, this song also features the worst singing on the entire record for Kendrick. Not only are we hit again and again and again with these silly cries of "Don't judge me," Kendrick sounds like the frontman of some awful Orange County emo band. But I'm also kind of confused about the logic of this track. The idea that God should not be judging the questionable things that Kendrick has gotten himself into on this track, or that the material things, the material desires that Kendrick is rapping about, having them is almost like being God. It seems just kind of counter to things that he's said in the past. And I get that contradiction and hypocrisy and inconsistency of faith, of self, of morality is kind of a theme, a major theme of this album. But to me, this just did not say anything. It didn't go anywhere. It just seemed like a failed attempt at trying to make a poignant statement. That being said, the rest of the album, as far as the production, the sound, the music is actually incredible. I love the hard-hitting trap rhythms of DNA. They kick off the album really well, and that beat change up in the second half. Oh my God, that bass. The bass is earth-shattering. The instrumental on the song Element reminds me of something that Kanye would ride with much pride. The kick snare pattern on this track is great. The echoed vocal sample, the pretty pianos highlighting the chorus too. Kendrick's singing on this hook isn't bad either. I'll make it look sexy. The very smooth and spacey feel is way too stripped back and minimal to be one of my favorite instrumentals here, but the track does a great job of sort of playing a foundational role for Kendrick's lyrics. You know, some instrumentals here steal the show. Some are really stark. They're really skeletal. They're really just like only the essential things. Sort of like the song Fear 2, which is not really one of the most vibrant instrumentals on the track until actually you kind of hit the second half, where some really nice faint string sections do a lot to elevate the song. The song Pride, I kind of love the slow, sad beats on this track and watery guitars. It may not seem like much, but the sound of this song is one of my favorites on the entire record. I love how kind of woozy and drunk and intoxicated and warped the song feels. Not only from the instrumentation do I get that vibe, but also some of the weird effects and pitches on Kendrick's voice throughout the song too. The pace of the song also makes it really easy to kind of eat up each profound line that Kendrick is stating on the track. The song Lust, which I would anticipate given its title to be fiery, is actually chilling. Features one of the most eerie hooks that Kendrick has ever laid on a track. And the song Triple X I love because it kind of has this three-phase progression to it. The intro, the banger middle point, the slow, jazzy, spacey, sort of dystopian vocals from Bono. I'll say it twice, it went over way better than expected. And then after that, there are a lot of various sound effects and weird sonic passages at the end of tracks and beginning of tracks to kind of highlight the meaning of the song that just played or the song that's about to play. Even when playing it relatively straightforward, Kendrick has to add in all of these little extra details to get you thinking a little bit more deeply about what you're hearing. God damn us all. And again, I'll say I love generally the sound of this album. It's vivid, it's stark, it's sharp, it's stripped down, it's raw, it's rugged, it's tattered, it's dirty. There are a lot of things to like about this album, but I will say that it does read to me as kind of inconsistent. Kendrick's most inconsistent album yet, actually, not just with the handful of tracks on this thing that I thought were pretty lackluster, but also with the themes of this record being kind of spotty and, again, unresolved. Some tracks aren't so much a statement, but try to embody what the title is representing. Others just seem like mere references to the topic at hand, or really just kind of fail to say anything of significance about it. And while yes, inconsistency and conflict is certainly a theme of this album, it was intentional going into this record, I don't think it's always to this album's benefit. I do see the value in releasing an album where you essentially kind of document the war that goes on in one's mind when you're tackling issues like love and lust and fear and God, and what role these things play in the world we're living in today. But I think Kendrick could have done a better job of just sitting on these ideas, mulling them over more, and possibly stringing together a more central idea to tie it all together just to give this album more impact, as opposed to kind of rushing it out so that his statements on Fox News and the recent election of Donald Trump would still be relevant. I don't think this album is a total mess, and I think it's far from being worthless. And I wouldn't say the album has no meaning either. I think what the album means is very much up to the listener, I'll say again. And I don't think we've ever heard Kendrick's dark side like we have on this album right here before. But I have heard Kendrick release better projects than this. At least 3 of them, I would say. And that's pretty much what leads me to say that I'm feeling a decent to strong 7 on this record. Tran?
You're giving this album a 7?
Well, no, it's not a 10. It's not a 10 for me.
Then why are you wearing the yellow flannel?
It's just symbolic. I figured it's a Kendrick review. It's exciting. Wear the flannel.
No. You can't use it that way. You can't wear the yellow flannel like that.
Yes, I am. How'd you do that?
The yellow flannel's gonna sit right here till you learn how to use it the right way.
I'm naked.
The yellow flannel's not just some meme. It's not just some meme that you do. It's a special thing for a special occasion. You don't just wear it all willy-nilly, Bam!